This is the story of a soldier, a hero who answered the call of his country, who returned home wearing the uniform of the United States Army, expecting to be met with honor and gratitude. But instead, he was met with hatred. His name was Isaac Woodard Jr. He had survived the horrors of World War II. He had fought bravely on distant shores, but he would never see his home again. Because just hours after being discharged from the Army, before he could even make it home to his loved ones, he was brutally blinded by a police officer. And what followed would echo across the nation. An event so shocking, it helped ignite a powerful national movement. This is Whisper&Tales, and tonight we tell the story they tried to keep in the shadows, the story they never wanted the world to hear. Isaac Woodard Jr. was born in 1919 in South Carolina. He grew up during a time when many African-American men faced unfair treatment because of their race, but despite this, he decided to answer the call to fight for freedom in World War II. Like many other black soldiers, Isaac believed that by serving his country, he could help make the world a better place and show that African Americans deserve the same rights as everyone else. He served in the Pacific Theater, far from home, where he faced dangerous battles and tough conditions. Over time, Isaac worked his way up and became a sergeant, a position of leadership and respect. After several years of service, he was honorably discharged in February 1946, proud of his hard work and dedication. At just 26 years old, Isaac had already experienced the horrors of war and had made it through, surviving when many others did not. After all he had been through, he was finally going home. He was excited to reunite with his family and return to a normal life. On February 12, 1946, just hours after he had officially been discharged from the Army, Isaac boarded a Greyhound bus in Georgia. He was heading home to South Carolina, where his family was waiting for him. He wore his full Army uniform on the bus, which was a symbol of his service and sacrifice. He had fought for freedom and hoped to live a life where he could be treated with the respect he deserved. However, little did Isaac know that the country he had fought for in a world war was about to show him a much darker side. Even though he had served with pride, America had something much more painful and unfair waiting for him when he returned home. As the bus continued its journey through South Carolina, Isaac Woodard, who had just come home from war, made a simple and polite request to the driver. He asked to be let off at a rest stop so he could use the bathroom. It was a small, reasonable request, one that anyone might make on a long bus ride. However, this simple action would soon change his life in a way he could never have imagined. The bus driver, who was white, didn't take kindly to being told what to do. In 1946 South Carolina, racial tensions were high, and a black man asking a white person for something, no matter how simple, could be seen as disrespectful. The driver's ego was bruised, and an argument began. Woodard tried to stay calm, insisting that he was being respectful and simply needed a quick stop. But despite his politeness, the bus driver grew angrier. The situation was tense, and the bus moved on. But the problem didn't end there. When the bus reached the small town of Batesburg, the driver took things a step further. Instead of letting the matter go, he decided to call the police. That's when Chief Linwood Shull arrived on the scene. Shull didn't bother to ask any questions. He didn't wait to hear Isaac's side of the story. Without hesitation, without any care for justice or fairness, Shull dragged Isaac Woodard off the bus, physically removing him in a show of complete power and disregard for his rights. In that moment, it became clear Woodard's mere existence as a black man was enough to make him a target, regardless of his military service or the respect he had shown. It was a shocking moment that would mark the beginning of a nightmare for Isaac Woodard, one that would forever alter his life. What happened next was nothing short of horrific, and it's hard to even imagine the pain and terror Isaac Woodard must have experienced. After being dragged off the bus, Isaac was taken to a small jail cell where Chief Linwood Shull unleashed a brutal attack on him. Using a nightstick, Shull beat Isaac mercilessly, hitting him again and again, without any care for his well-being. Shull didn't stop. He kept striking Isaac with no remorse or hesitation. In that terrifying moment, Isaac's world went black. Shull struck him in the eyes with such force that Isaac lost his vision completely. It wasn't just a temporary injury, it was permanent. Isaac Woodard, a young man who had proudly served his country in war, now found himself lying in a dark, cold jail cell, his face bruised and his eyes damaged beyond repair. The beating left him bleeding and in agony, but his suffering didn't end there. He was denied any medical help. No one came to tend to his wounds or offer him any comfort. He was left to suffer in the dark, alone. Isaac's life would never be the same again. In a matter of moments, the sacrifices he had made in service to his country were overshadowed by the brutal reality of racial violence. He had given everything to serve America, and in return, this is how he was treated. His vision taken from him, his body broken, and his rights violated in the most savage way. It was a tragic reminder of the ugly truths of racism, even in a country that claimed to stand for justice and equality. When news of Isaac Woodard's brutal beating reached the public, it sent shockwaves across the nation. The story of a young, black war hero being violently attacked for simply asking to use the bathroom was too much for many to ignore. It sparked immediate outrage and horror as people realized the depth of racial hatred that existed, even against those who had served their country with honor. The NAACP quickly stepped in to demand justice. Civil rights leaders, who had long been fighting for equality and an end to racial violence, began to speak out about the injustice. The case became a rallying cry for those who were determined to see an end to the systemic oppression faced by African Americans. It wasn't just the leaders of the civil rights movement who were moved by the story. Others in the public eye also began to take notice. One of the most influential voices at the time was Orson Welles, a famous actor and radio personality. Known for his role in Citizen Kane and his iconic radio broadcasts, Welles used his platform to speak out about what had happened to Isaac Woodard. On his radio show, Welles said the words that would bring even more attention to the case. This was a man in uniform, a soldier, and they beat him blind. His words hit hard, and they helped the public see the terrible injustice of the situation. People began to pay attention to the story, and outrage grew. The fact that Isaac Woodard, a soldier who had fought for freedom, could be treated in such a brutal and unfair way resonated with many, sparking protests, demands for justice, and a wider conversation about racism in America. Finally, President Harry S. Truman heard the whispers, and he didn't stay silent. President Truman's decision to order a federal investigation into the brutal attack on Isaac Woodard was a historic move. At the time, it was almost unheard of for a local police abuse case, especially one involving a white officer and a black man, to be looked at through a federal lens. This was, after all, a time when racial violence was too often overlooked or dismissed by local authorities. Truman's intervention signaled a rare moment when the federal government acknowledged the deep-seated racial injustice that was happening right under its nose. As a result of this investigation, Chief Linwood Scholl was taken to trial. But despite the national attention the case had garnered, the trial was little more than a mockery of justice. From the start, it was clear that the system was stacked against Isaac Woodard. The jury was entirely white, a blatant sign that the case would not be tried fairly in the community that had already shown so much bias. The judge, too, was indifferent. His attitude toward the case was one of detachment, as if it didn't deserve the serious attention it deserved. Despite Scholl's own admission that he had struck Isaac Woodard with a nightstick, blinding him for life, the jury still found him not guilty. It was a cruel and glaring example of the racial double standards that existed in the South at the time. Scholl's brutal actions went unpunished, and Isaac Woodard's quest for justice ended in failure. The system had failed him completely, but even though Woodard never received the justice he deserved, his story became a catalyst for change. The trial and the outrage surrounding it became a powerful moment that exposed the ugly truth about racism in America. It wasn't just a case of one man being wronged, it was a symbol of the deep injustices Black Americans faced every day. People were beginning to see the horrors of racial violence more clearly, and the anger and frustration it stirred would go on to fuel the civil rights movement. Isaac Woodard's suffering, though it did not result in immediate justice, sparked something much bigger, a movement that would challenge the very foundations of racial inequality in the United States. President Harry Truman was so deeply disturbed by what had happened to Isaac Woodard that in 1947, he took an extraordinary step. He delivered a landmark speech, one that called, in no uncertain terms, for an end to racial violence in America. It was a moment that marked a turning point. Just 1 year later, Truman would go even further. In 1948, he signed Executive Order 9981, an order that would officially desegregate the United States military. Isaac Woodard's suffering had not been in vain. His story, his experience, helped to ignite the modern civil rights movement. And even though he would never see again, even though the violence had taken his sight, his courage helped an entire nation open its eyes. Isaac Woodard Jr. lived out the rest of his life blind. He died in 1992. His name is not as well known as others, but it should be, because it was his pain, his silence, and his courage that helped force a change. Thank you for watching this episode of Whisper&Tales. If this story moved you, help us share it. Like, subscribe, and let the truth be heard.